The day Dalton Xavier found the woman half dead by the creek running through his Montana property, he thought she was already gone, her body broken and bloodied among the rocks where the current had deposited her like driftwood after a storm. He had been checking his northern fence line that April morning in 1882, riding his sorrel gelding through the awakening grasslands when he spotted what he first mistook for a deer, carcass caught in the shallows. But something made him dismount, made him wade into the cold water despite his better judgment about staying dry on a morning when frost still clung to the shadows. When he reached her, he saw she was breathing, barely, her chest rising and falling in shallow movements that seemed too weak to sustain life much longer. She was young, maybe 20 years old, with black hair that spread around her in the water like dark silk. Her clothes marked her as tribal, though he could not immediately identify which nation. Her face was swollen from injuries, and when he carefully lifted her from the water, he saw the wounds covering her body, the bruises that told of violence he did not want to imagine. Dalton was not a small man at 27, standing well over 6 feet with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work, but she weighed almost nothing in his arms as he carried her to his horse. The gelding shifted nervously at the smell of blood, but Dalton spoke low and calm until the animal settled. He managed to mount with the woman cradled against his chest, and he turned toward home, his mind already racing through what supplies he had that might save her life. His ranch sat 5 miles from Bozeman, Montana, a decent spread of 300 acres that he had built up over the past 6 years. The house was small but solid, built of timber and stone with his own hands after he had saved enough money working other men's cattle. He lived alone, had lived alone since his parents died of fever when he was 19, and the isolation had suited him fine until this moment when he desperately wished for a woman's knowledge of healing, for someone who knew more than his rough cowboy medicine. He kicked open the door and carried her to his bed, the only real bed in the house. She left wet marks on his quilts, but he paid no mind as he began cutting away her clothing to assess the damage. He had doctored cattle and horses, had even sewn up a few ranch hands over the years, but this was different. Her breathing grew more labored as he worked, and he saw the dark bruise spreading across her ribs that suggested internal injury. There were cuts on her arms and legs, rope burns on her wrists that made his jaw clench with anger at whoever had done this. He heated water on his stove and cleaned her wounds as gently as he could, speaking to her though she showed no sign of hearing. "You are going to be all right," he said, though he had no idea if it was true. "I have got you now. You are safe here." He bound her ribs, hoping they were only bruised and not broken, and covered the deeper cuts with clean cloth torn from an old shirt. When he had done all he could, he pulled his blankets over her and sat back, studying her face now that the worst of the mud and blood were cleaned away. She was beautiful, he realized, even with the swelling and bruising. High cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips that were cracked but would heal. He felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in years, not since Mary Ann Turner had married the banker's son and moved to Helena. He pushed the feeling away. This woman was injured, possibly dying, and here he was noticing her looks like some kind of fool. For 3 days, she lingered between life and death while Dalton kept vigil. He forced water between her lips when he could, bathed her face with cool cloths when fever took her. He slept in his chair beside the bed, waking at every sound she made. On the 2nd day, he rode into town for laudanum and more bandages, telling the doctor briefly about finding an injured woman, glossing over the details that might bring questions he could not answer. "You should bring her to town," Doc Morrison said, peering at Dalton over his spectacles. "I could tend her proper." But Dalton shook his head. "She is too fragile to move. I will do my best." He did not add that he feared what might happen if people learned of her presence, how some folks in town felt about the tribal peoples who had been pushed onto reservations. There had been talk just last month about Crow who had left their designated lands, angry words about savages who did not know their place. He would not risk her safety on the uncertain charity of townsfolk. On the morning of the fourth day, when he was changing the bandage on her arm, her eyes opened. They were dark brown, nearly black, and they stared unseeing at the ceiling. He froze, holding his breath, waiting for her to speak or cry out. Instead, she turned her head slowly in his direction, and he saw the white cloudiness that covered both eyes. She was blind. "You are safe," he said softly. "You are in my home. I found you by the creek. You were hurt badly." She said something in a language he did not understand, her voice rough from disuse. She tried to sit up, panic clear in her sudden movements, but she cried out in pain and fell back against the pillows. He put a hand on her shoulder, careful to be gentle. "Please do not move. Your ribs are injured. You need to rest." She spoke again, faster now, words tumbling over each other in rising fear. Her hands came up, reaching blindly, and without thinking he caught them in his own. The moment their skin touched, she went still. She turned her head toward him again, her sightless eyes seeming to search his face. Slowly, tentatively, she pulled one hand free and reached up toward him. He understood and leaned closer, letting her fingers brush against his jaw, his cheek, his forehead. She was reading him the only way she could, learning his face through touch. Her fingers were gentle despite the calluses that spoke of hard work. They traced his features with careful attention, pausing at the scar on his left eyebrow where a steer had kicked him when he was 16. When she had mapped his entire face, she let her hand fall back to the bed and said something in her language, just a few words, but they were spoken with such certainty that they sent a chill down his spine. "I do not understand," he said. "I only speak English, a little Spanish." "Do you know English?" She was silent for a long moment, then spoke haltingly, the words clearly difficult for her. "You are him, the one from my dreams." Dalton felt his heart skip. What? But she had exhausted herself. Her eyes closed again, and within moments her breathing evened into sleep. He sat back, her words echoing in his mind. The one from my dreams. It was impossible. She had to be confused, her mind addled by fever and injury. But something in the way she had said it, the absolute conviction in her voice, made him wonder. Over the next week, as she slowly regained strength, he learned her name was Chenoa Joyah, that she was Shoshone, that she had been blind since birth. Her English was limited but improving as they talked each day, and his understanding of her language began to grow as she taught him words. She told him she was 21, that she had been traveling with her uncle's family when they were attacked by white men who wanted their horses and supplies. Her uncle, aunt, and 2 cousins were killed. She had been taken by one of the men, used in ways she described only briefly before falling silent, her face turning away from him though her eyes could not show her pain. "He brought me to a house," she said on the 8th day since her awakening. "Other men were there. They argued about me. One wanted to kill me because I had seen their faces." She gave a bitter laugh. "But I cannot see. Another wanted to keep me. They fought. In the fighting, I ran. I could not see where I was going. I fell into water, hit rocks. The current took me. I thought I would die." "You are safe now," Dalton said, the words feeling inadequate. "I will not let anyone hurt you." She turned her head toward him, and though her eyes could not meet his, he felt the weight of her attention. "Why do you help me? You do not know me. Some white men hate my people." "I am not like those men," he said quietly. "What they did was evil. Any decent person would have helped you." "Not any person," she said. "You have a good heart. I felt it when I touched your face. The spirits told me." He did not know what to say to that. He had never been a particularly spiritual man, attending church when he was young because his mother insisted, but finding little comfort in sermons about sin and salvation. The practical faith of ranch work suited him better, the honest labor that brought clear results. But he could not dismiss the certainty in Chenoa's voice when she spoke of spirits and dreams. "Tell me about these dreams," he said finally. She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "Since I was a girl, I have dreamed of a man with a kind voice, with gentle hands. In my dreams I cannot see him, just as I cannot see in waking. But I know his face through touching, and I know his heart through his actions. He finds me when I am lost. He brings me home." "Your home is with your people," Dalton said, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of her leaving. "When you are well enough, I will take you to the reservation. Your family will be worried." She shook her head. "My uncle's family was all I had left. My parents died many winters ago. There is no one who will worry for Chenoa." The words were spoken simply, without self-pity, but they cut through Dalton like a knife. He knew that loneliness, the particular ache of being unmoored from family and home. His own isolation had been a choice, a way to protect himself from more loss after his parents died. But Chenoa's isolation had been thrust upon her by violence, her family stolen in the cruelest way. "Then you will stay here until you are healed," he said. "As long as you need." She smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face into something luminous. "You are him," she said again. "I know it is true." As the days passed into weeks, Dalton found his carefully ordered life appended in ways both challenging and strangely welcome. He had grown accustomed to silence, to the rhythm of solitary work, but Chenoa's presence filled his small house with new sounds. She was determined not to be helpless, insisting on learning the layout of his home despite her injuries. He watched her trail her fingers along the walls, counting steps, building a mental map of the space. She knocked over a water pitcher, stumbled over his boots left carelessly by the door, burned her hand on the stove before he could warn her, but she never complained or gave up. "I could do more before," she said one morning, frustration clear in her voice. "I could cook so tan hides. I could walk anywhere in my camp without help. Now I am weak and useless." "You nearly died," Dalton reminded her. "You need time to heal. Give yourself that time." But he understood her need for independence. So he began to teach her his house more thoroughly, moving with her through each room, describing everything he could. His homestead was not large, just the main room with the kitchen area and his bed, a small storage room, and the space he had intended to turn into another bedroom but had never needed to finish. Outside was the barn, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, and the various outbuildings that made up a working ranch. "Your home is good," she said after one of their tours. "I can feel that you built it with care." "I wanted something solid," he said, "something that would last." "You wanted something that could not be taken from you," she said, and her insight startled him. "Maybe," he admitted. She reached out, finding his arm, her hand warm through his sleeve. "I understand. I wanted that too, but everything can be taken. The spirits teach us to hold loosely to what we love, because loss is the nature of life." "That is a hard teaching," Dalton said. "Yes," she agreed, "but it is true." He thought about her words often in the days that followed, especially when he found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way sunlight caught in her black hair, the grace of her movements as she grew more confident in his space. He was falling in love with her, he realized with a start one evening as he sat watching her feel her way through preparing vegetables for their dinner. It was a foolish thing, dangerous even. She was Shoshone, he was white. She was blind, dependent on him. The power imbalance was troubling, and he tried to push his feelings down, to keep them locked away where they could not cause harm. But Chenoa seemed to sense the shift in him anyway. One night after they had eaten and he was washing dishes, she said, "You have become quiet with me." "Have I upset you?" "No," he said quickly. "You have done nothing wrong." "Then why do you move away when I come near? Why do you speak less?" He dried his hands on a cloth, buying time. She was sitting at his small table, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward him with that uncanny sense she had for locating him in space. There was no point in lying to her. She would know. "I have feelings that I should not have," he said carefully. "I do not want to make you uncomfortable." "Feelings? I care for you," he said. "More than I should. You are here because you need help, not because you want to be. I do not want you to feel obligated or trapped." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, and before he could move to help her, she walked straight to him, her hands outstretched. She found his chest, then moved her hands up to his face, cupping it between her palms. "I told you," she said softly. "You are the one from my dreams. You think I said that lightly." "The spirits gave me those dreams for a reason. They were preparing me to find you." "Chenoa," he said, but she pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "I am blind, Dalton Xavier, but I am not helpless. I am here because I want to be here. I care for you too. I have cared since the first moment I woke and heard your voice. I knew you then." He wanted to argue, to list all the reasons this was impossible, but she was so close, her face tilted up toward his, and he could feel the warmth of her breath. Instead of speaking, he did what he had wanted to do for weeks. He leaned down and kissed her. She made a small sound of surprise, then melted against him, her arms winding around his neck. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened as she pressed closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she was smiling. "Yes," she said, "you are him." They took their time after that, learning each other in careful increments. Dalton courted her properly, despite the strangeness of courting a woman who already lived in his home. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and described their colors, letting her feel the velvet texture of petals. He took her riding on his gentlest mare, sitting behind her with his arms around her waist, describing the landscape they passed through in detail. She taught him more of her language, told him stories of her people, sang songs in a voice that made his heart ache with its beauty. They did not rush into intimacy, though the attraction between them was undeniable. Dalton was acutely aware of what she had suffered, the violence done to her by men who took what they wanted without care for her humanity. He would not add to that pain. So he waited, let her set the pace, made sure she knew she could say no at any time without consequence. It was Chenoa who finally initiated more, coming to him one night after they had spent the evening sitting on his porch, listening to the sounds of night settling over the land. She found his hand in the darkness and tugged him toward the house, toward the bed they had not yet shared that way. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "I am sure," she said. "I want this. I want you." He loved her with all the gentleness and care he possessed, paying attention to every sound she made, every movement, making sure she was with him at each step. When she cried out at the end, it was with pleasure, not pain, and afterward she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you since the dreams. I will love you until the spirits call me home to the next world." "I love you too," he said, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. "I never thought I would feel this way about anyone, but you changed everything." "Good," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Everything needed changing. They married in midsummer. A small ceremony performed by a justice of the peace in Bozeman, who raised his eyebrows at the unusual couple, but asked no questions beyond the legally required ones. Dalton had worried about bringing Chenoa to town, about the reactions they might face, but she refused to be hidden away like something shameful. She wore a dress he had bought for her, simple blue cotton that she said felt soft against her skin, and she held his arm with pride as they walked to the courthouse. There were stares, whispers, a few hostile looks that made Dalton's jaw clench. But there were also neutral faces, even a few that seemed accepting. Doc Morrison, who had treated Dalton's broken finger last fall, nodded to them in the street. The woman who ran the general store smiled and said congratulations when Dalton stopped to buy supplies. It was not universal acceptance, but it was enough to give him hope that they could build a life here without constant harassment. At home, they settled into the rhythm of married life. Chenoa insisted on doing her share of the work, learning to manage the household despite her blindness. She cooked with confidence after Dalton organized the kitchen in a way she could remember, keeping everything in consistent places. She gathered eggs from the chickens, learning each hen's personality and preferred nesting spot. She even helped with basic ranch tasks, feeding the horses, pumping water, hanging laundry. Dalton showed her the fence lines, let her memorize the layout of the property so she could walk safely within certain boundaries. "I will not be a burden," she told him once, and he heard the old fear in her voice. "You are not a burden," he said firmly. "You are my wife, my partner, we work together." She smiled at that, the tension leaving her shoulders. Yes, together. But their peace was not to last uninterrupted. In late September, nearly 5 months after Dalton had found Chenoa, 3 men rode onto his property. He was repairing the barn roof when he spotted them, and something about the way they sat their horses, the way they looked around his land with proprietary interest, set his instincts on edge. He climbed down carefully and walked to meet them, positioning himself between the house and the strangers. "Help you gentlemen?" he asked, keeping his voice level. The man in front, tall and lean with a scar running down his left cheek, looked him over with cold blue eyes. "Heard tell you might have something that belongs to us." "I doubt that," Dalton said. "Everything here is mine, legally bought and paid for." "Not talking about land," the man said. "Talking about an Indian woman, blind one. We had her a while back, but she got away. Been looking for her ever since." Dalton felt ice flood his veins, but he kept his expression neutral. "Do not know what you are talking about." "No." The man leaned forward in his saddle. "See, we heard different." "Heard you rode into Bozeman a few months back, asked Doc Morrison about treating a woman. Heard you got married recent to some Indian girl. That is an interesting coincidence, would not you say?" "My wife is none of your business," Dalton said flatly. "And you are trespassing. Time for you to leave." The other 2 men, both younger and harder looking than their leader, shifted in their saddles. One rested his hand on the pistol at his hip. The scarred man noticed Dalton tracking the movement and showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. "Now, we can do this easy or hard," he said. "Easy is you hand her over, we go our way, you forget you ever saw her. Hard is we take her anyway and burn your pretty ranch down around your ears. Your choice." Dalton was not wearing his gun belt, having left it in the house, but there was a rifle in the barn within reach if he was fast. He gauged the distance, calculated odds he did not like. 3 against 1, and they were clearly men who knew violence. But they would have to kill him before he let them take Chenoa. "You should know," he said conversationally, "that what you are describing is murder and kidnapping. Federal crimes, especially when it involves Indian lands and peoples. The territorial marshal takes that kind of thing seriously." The scarred man laughed. "Marshal is not going to care about one blind Indian girl, especially not when she was running from justice." "Justice?" "She killed a man." Our friend, matter of fact, stabbed him while we were camped, then ran. We've been tracking her to bring her in for trial." "That is a lie," Dalton said. "She told me what happened. Your friend, if that is what he was, used her after you killed her family. She defended herself." "That is not murder, that is survival." "Your word against ours," the man said, "and there are 3 of us." The standoff might have turned violent then, but the sound of a rifle cocking echoed across the yard. Everyone froze, and Dalton turned to see Chenoa standing on the porch, holding his Winchester. She could not see the men, but she had positioned herself facing the sound of their voices, and the rifle, while not perfectly aimed, was pointed in their general direction. "My husband is not alone," she called out, her voice steady. "And I may be blind, but at this distance I can hear where you are well enough to shoot. Maybe I miss. Maybe I do not. You want to risk it." "Chenoa, get back inside," Dalton said, fear for her making his voice sharp. "No," she said simply. "They want me. Let them see what they are trying to take. I am not a thing to be owned or traded. I am a woman, a wife, and I will defend my home." The scarred man studied her for a long moment, then looked back at Dalton. Something in his expression had changed, calculation replacing certainty. "This is not over," he finally said. "We will be back." "If you come back, I will be ready," Dalton said, "and I will have the marshal here waiting with me." The men turned their horses and rode off, but Dalton knew the threat was real. They would return, probably with more men, unless he found a way to end this permanently. He waited until they were out of sight, then ran to Chenoa, who was shaking so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. "I have never held a gun before," she said. "I was not sure I was even holding it right." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Dalton found himself laughing, a short bark of sound that was part fear, part admiration. "You were perfect," he said, taking the rifle and wrapping her in his arms. "Absolutely perfect." But that night, lying in bed while Chenoa slept fitfully beside him, Dalton made plans. At first light, he would ride to Bozeman and find the territorial marshal. He would tell the whole story, produce Chenoa as a witness, and let the law handle these men. It was a risk, exposing Chenoa to official scrutiny, but it was a smaller risk than waiting for those men to return with reinforcements. Marshal Thomas Welland was a hard man in his middle 50s, weathered by years of frontier justice. But he had a reputation for fairness that extended even to tribal peoples. When Dalton found him at the boarding house where he stayed when in Bozeman, the marshal listened to the whole story without interruption, his gray eyes sharp and assessing. "You are saying these men killed her family, kidnapped her, and now they are harassing you on your own land?" Welland said when Dalton finished, "That is right. And they claimed she killed one of them in self-defense, but they are calling it murder." "Did she?" Dalton hesitated, then nodded. "She said she stabbed a man who was attacking her." "But after what they did to her family, after what they did to her, any jury would call that justified." "Most juries," Welland corrected. "But you are right that it sounds like self-defense. Problem is, I need more than your word. I need to talk to your wife." "She is Shoshone," Dalton said. "Some folks in town already look at us sideways for being married. I am worried about what might happen if this gets public." "Son, it is already public the moment those men showed up at your place," Welland said bluntly. "Now it is a choice between dealing with it through law or dealing with it through lead. Which would you prefer?" Put that way, there was only one answer. Dalton rode back to the ranch and explained the situation to Chenoa, who listened with her characteristic calm before agreeing to speak to the marshal. 2 days later, Welland rode out to their property and spent an hour questioning Chenoa in detail about what had happened. His manner was brusque, but not unkind, and he seemed genuinely troubled by her account of the violence done to her family. I will put out warrants for these men, he said when she finished. Description you gave matches some known outlaws who have been causing trouble through Montana and Wyoming territories. If they are who I think they have got a string of robberies and at least 2 other murders attached to their names. What about the claim that she killed one of them? Dalton asked. If she did, good riddance, Wellen said flatly. No law against defending your own life. But I will need you both to come to town if I catch them, testify at trial. You willing to do that? Chenoa did not hesitate. Yes, I will speak truth about what they did. It took 3 weeks for Wellen to track down the men. They had been hiding out in the foothills west of town, apparently gathering more outlaws to join them in another attempt at Dalton's ranch. When Wellen and his deputies surrounded their camp in the early morning darkness, a brief gunfight erupted. The scarred man and one of his companions were killed. The third man survived and was brought to Bozeman to face justice. The trial drew significant attention, not least because of the unusual circumstances of a blind Shoshone woman testifying against a white outlaw. Dalton sat beside Chenoa in the courtroom, ready to translate if needed, though her English had grown strong enough that she could speak for herself. She told her story with quiet dignity, her sightless eyes turned toward where she knew the judge sat, and when the defense attorney tried to discredit her testimony by emphasizing her blindness, she responded with words that silenced the room. I cannot see with my eyes, she said, but I can hear and feel and smell. I knew how many men there were by their voices, their footsteps. I knew when they killed my family by the sound of gunfire, the smell of blood. I knew what the man did to me by the weight of his body, the pain he caused. You do not need eyes to know evil when it touches you. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding the surviving outlaw guilty of murder, kidnapping, and assault. He was sentenced to hang, and while Dalton did not particularly enjoy the thought of any man's death, he could not pretend to mourn a person who had caused such suffering. In the aftermath of the trial, something shifted in how the town regarded Dalton and Chenoa. They would never be universally accepted, but the trial had made real to people what Chenoa had survived, and there was a grudging respect for her courage. The storekeeper's wife, a formidable woman named Martha Benson, even came out to the ranch a few weeks later with a basket of preserves and an invitation to the church social. I know you two do not attend services regular, Martha said bluntly, and I know some folks in town have been unkind. But you are part of this community whether they like it or not, and my Bible tells me to love my neighbor, so I am inviting you and I hope you will come. Chenoa, who had been listening from inside the house, came out onto the porch. Thank you, she said to Martha. We will think about it. After Martha left, Chenoa turned to Dalton with a question in her expression. Do you want to go to the social? Only if you do, he said. I do not care what they think of us, but I know it matters for practical reasons. Easier to live here if we are on decent terms with neighbors. Then we will go, she decided. And we will show them that we are not so different from anyone else who wants to build a life. The church social was awkward at first, conversations stopping when they entered, eyes following them as they moved through the crowd. But Martha Benson took them under her wing, introducing them to people, speaking firmly when anyone tried to make a cutting remark. By the end of the evening, Dalton found himself discussing cattle prices with a neighboring rancher while Chenoa sat with a group of women who were fascinated by her beadwork, which she had brought along at Martha's suggestion. How do you do that without seeing? One woman asked, not unkindly. I feel the patterns, Chenoa explained, her fingers moving over the leather she was decorating. Each bead has a place, a purpose. I know where they go the same way you know where things are in your kitchen without looking. Practice and memory. The women murmured with interest, and Dalton felt a rush of pride at how easily Chenoa handled their curiosity, turning what could have been uncomfortable into an opportunity to educate. On the ride home that night, he told her as much. "You were amazing," he said. "The way you talked to them showed them your work. I think you changed some minds tonight." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they will forget by tomorrow, but it does not matter. We know who we are. We know what we have built together. That is enough." As autumn turned to winter, they settled deeper into their life together. Dalton taught Chenoa to recognize his cattle by the sound of their lowing, each animal having a slightly different voice. She taught him the Shoshone names for the stars she could not see but knew from stories. And on clear nights, they would lie on blankets in the yard while she told him about the patterns and meanings her people found in the sky. They talked about the future, about expanding the ranch, about children they might have someday. "I worry sometimes," Chenoa admitted one night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside their snug house. "About bringing children into a world that might hate them for being both Shoshone and white." "I worry about that too," Dalton said honestly. "But I also think about how much love we have to give them, how we can teach them to be strong and proud of both sides of their heritage. That has to count for something." "You are a good man, Dalton Xavier," she said, snuggling closer to his warmth. "Our children will be lucky to have you as their father." By spring, Chenoa was pregnant. She announced it one morning in late March with such casual confidence that Dalton nearly dropped the bucket of milk he was carrying. "You are sure?" he asked, setting the bucket down carefully. "I am sure," she said, smiling. "The signs are all there. We will have a child before winter comes again." He whooped with joy and swung her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. They celebrated that night with a special dinner, and Dalton found himself making plans, thinking about the room he would finally finish, the cradle he would build, all the things their child would need. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Chenoa remained active despite Dalton's hovering concern, insisting that Shoshone women worked right up until birth, and she saw no reason to be different. She was gathering eggs one morning in August when she went still, her head tilted in that listening pose Dalton had learned to recognize as her sensing something important. "What is it?" he asked, coming to her side. "Riders," she said. "Many of them. From the north." Dalton listened and caught the sound she had heard minutes before him, the thunder of multiple horses approaching fast. His hand went to his rifle, fear spiking through him that somehow the troubles of last fall had returned. But when the riders came into view, he saw they were tribal, a group of about 20 Shoshone on painted horses, led by an older man whose bearing spoke of authority. "Stay behind me," Dalton said to Chenoa, but she shook her head. "No, if they are my people, I want to speak to them." The riders stopped at the edge of Dalton's property, and the leader raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Dalton returned it cautiously, and the man rode forward alone until he was close enough for conversation. "I am called Running Wolf," the man said in accented but clear English. "We are from the Wind River Reservation to the south. We have been searching for survivors of a family attacked by white men last spring. We were told in town that a blind woman lives here, a Shoshone woman. We have come to see if she is Chenoa, daughter of Little Deer and Swift Water." Chenoa stepped forward before Dalton could stop her, speaking in Shoshone too fast for him to follow. Running Wolf responded in kind, his weathered face showing surprise and then sorrow as she spoke. The conversation went on for several minutes, and Dalton caught her uncle's name, heard the grief in her voice as she described what had happened. Finally, Running Wolf dismounted and approached, and Chenoa reached out to touch his face in greeting. "My cousin," she said, switching back to English for Dalton's benefit. Running Wolf is my father's cousin. We thought all his family had gone north to the Lemhi Reservation. We were going there, Running Wolf said, but we heard of the attack on your uncle's group. We came to see if anyone survived to bring them home if we could. He looked at Dalton, his gaze assessing but not hostile. You are the one who saved her. I found her, Dalton said. Took her in. Now she is my wife. Running Wolf's eyebrows rose. Your wife? Yes, Chenoa said firmly. Dalton is my husband. I carry his child. This is my home now. The old man was quiet for a long moment, and Dalton braced himself for anger or demands that Chenoa leave with them. Instead, Running Wolf nodded slowly. The spirits work in ways we do not always understand, he said. If you are content here, if this man treats you with respect and love, then I am glad you survived to find happiness. He turned to Dalton. But I must ask, will you let her keep her people's ways? Let her teach her children about their Shoshone blood? Of course, Dalton said. I would not ask her to forget who she is. Our children will know both worlds. Then you are a wiser man than most, Running Wolf said. We will camp on your land tonight if you permit it. In the morning we will continue to the Lemhi Reservation, but tonight let Chenoa visit with her people. Let her remember she is not alone in the world. Dalton agreed readily, and that evening his small ranch became a gathering place of Shoshone voices and songs. Chenoa moved among her people with joy Dalton had never seen in her, speaking her language without the effort of translation, laughing at jokes he did not understand. He felt a pang of sadness, wondering if she regretted choosing to stay with him instead of returning to her people. But when she found him standing at the edge of the firelight and took his hand, pulling him into the circle, he saw no regret in her face. This is my husband, she announced in Shoshone, and Running Wolf translated for those whose English was limited. He saved my life. He gave me love when I had lost everything. He is part of my people now, as I am part of his. The Shoshone welcomed him with varying degrees of warmth, but none with hostility. An old woman taught him a few more words in their language, laughing at his clumsy pronunciation. A young man about Dalton's age challenged him to a friendly shooting competition, which Dalton won by a narrow margin. Children came up to Chenoa, asking to touch her belly, marveling at the life growing inside her. By the time the evening ended, Dalton felt as though he had been given a gift, a glimpse into the world his wife came from, and their children would be part of. Before Running Wolf and his people left the next morning, the old man gave Chenoa a bundle wrapped in soft leather. Your mother's work, he explained. We have been keeping it safe, hoping to find family to give it to. Now it is yours. Chenoa unwrapped it with trembling hands, her fingers finding the intricate beadwork on what Dalton could see was a cradle board, beautifully crafted and decorated. She made this when she was pregnant with me, Chenoa said, tears streaming down her face. She told me about it many times. I never thought I would hold it. Your child will be the first to use it in a new generation, Running Wolf said. Remember us, cousin. Remember where you come from. But live your life here with joy. That is what your parents would have wanted. After they left, Chenoa was quiet for the rest of the day, holding the cradle board, running her fingers over the beadwork again and again. That night, she cried in Dalton's arms, grieving anew for all she had lost while also celebrating what she had found. I am caught between two worlds, she said. I love you and this life we are building, but today reminded me of everything I left behind, everything that was taken from me. You do not have to choose one or the other, Dalton said. You can be both, Shoshone and my wife, part of your people and part of this ranch. Our children will be proof that both worlds can exist in one person. She nodded against his chest. I know. but knowing it and feeling it are different things. Then feel it all, he said. Feel the grief and the joy, the loss and the love. I am here for all of it, always. The baby came in late October, arriving during an early snowstorm that turned the world white and hushed. The labor was long and difficult, and Dalton rode through the blizzard to fetch Doc Morrison, who grumbled about the weather but came nonetheless. For hours, Dalton sat outside the bedroom, listening to Chenoa's cries of pain and the doctor's calm instructions, feeling utterly helpless. He prayed to her spirits and his God, promising anything if only she and the baby would survive. Just before dawn, a baby's cry split the air, strong and indignant. Doc Morrison emerged a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a cloth, his lined face showing a rare smile. "You have got a son," he said. "Big, healthy boy with good lungs, and your wife did fine, though she is exhausted." Dalton nearly collapsed with relief. He entered the bedroom to find Chenoa propped against pillows, holding a tiny bundle. Even exhausted, her face glowed with happiness. She heard him enter and smiled. "Come meet your son," she said. He approached carefully, as if sudden movement might break the spell, and looked down at the baby in her arms. He was indeed large, with a shock of black hair and skin that was lighter than Chenoa's but darker than his own, a perfect blend of both parents. As Dalton watched, the baby opened his eyes, revealing dark gray irises that might turn brown or might stay gray, too soon to tell. "He is perfect," Dalton whispered. "He sees," Chenoa said, wonder in her voice. "The doctor checked. His eyes are clear. He will be able to see." Dalton heard the complex emotions in her words, relief and sadness mixed together. Relief that her child would not face the challenges her blindness brought, but perhaps sadness, too, that he would experience the world so differently from his mother. "What should we name him?" Dalton asked, taking his son's tiny hand, marveling at the perfect miniature fingers. "I have been thinking," Chenoa said. "In my people's way, he would receive a name based on something important, something meaningful. You found me by the water. The creek saved my life by carrying me to you. What is your word for the sound water makes?" "Rushing, babbling, flowing," Dalton suggested, then inspiration struck. "River. The creek flows to the river." "River Xavier," Chenoa said, testing the name. "Yes, he will be called River, and he will know that he came from the meeting of two currents, Shoshone and White, flowing together." As winter settled over Montana, the new family adjusted to life with an infant. Dalton had never been so tired or so happy, waking multiple times each night to help Chenoa with the baby, learning how to change cloths and interpret different cries. Chenoa navigated motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything, figuring out how to nurse, clean, and care for River despite not being able to see him. She learned his sounds and smells, the particular way he moved in her arms, developing her own methods that worked even if they looked different from how sighted mothers did things. "You are amazing," Dalton told her one night, watching her soothe a fussy River with practiced ease. "I am his mother," she said simply. "I will learn what he needs, just as my mother learned what I needed, even when she could not understand my blindness." Spring came again, bringing with it new challenges and joys. River grew rapidly, becoming a fat, happy baby who loved being outside, his gray eyes tracking birds and clouds with fascination. Chenoa would sit in the yard, holding him, and Dalton would describe everything River was seeing, knowing she wanted to experience the world through her son's eyes since she could not use her own. "He is watching a butterfly," Dalton said one warm May afternoon. "Yellow and black, dancing around the wildflowers. He is laughing." Chenoa smiled, her hand resting on River's chest to feel his chuckles. "Tell me more. I want to know everything he sees." So Dalton narrated the world, and in doing so found beauty in details he had never noticed before. The way morning light caught in spider webs, turning them to silver lace, the varied shades of green in new grass, the exact color of the sky before a storm. He became Chenoa's eyes and she became his heart, teaching him to appreciate what could not be seen but only felt. By River's first birthday, Dalton's ranch had prospered. His cattle herd had grown, he had hired a part-time hand to help with the heavy work, and he had purchased an adjacent 40 acres from a neighbor moving back east. The small house was getting cramped, so he began building an addition, 2 new rooms that would give them more space as River grew and hopefully as more children came. "You are building a dynasty," Chenoa teased him one evening, watching from her seat on the porch as he planed boards for the new rooms. "I am building a home," he corrected. "A place big enough for all the love we have to give." Their second child came in early 1885, a daughter they named Catherine, called Cat from the start because of the particular mewling cry she made as a newborn. Unlike River, who had been placid and easy, Cat was fierce from birth, nursing aggressively, crying loudly when displeased, grabbing anything within reach with surprisingly strong hands. "She is a warrior," Chenoa said fondly, "like my grandmother who was known for her strength." Cat's eyes were brown like her mother's but clear, sighted like River's. As she grew, she showed an early independence that both delighted and terrified Dalton. She would wriggle out of anyone's grasp, constantly exploring, getting into everything. River, now a toddler, took his role as big brother seriously, trying to keep track of his adventurous sister, calling for his parents when she went somewhere she should not. The ranch continued to thrive, and with prosperity came increased acceptance in Bozeman. Dalton's honest dealings and hard work earned respect, and Chenoa's gentle nature won over even skeptics. They were invited to community events, included in the social fabric of the town in ways that had seemed impossible that first difficult year. There were still those who looked askance at their mixed family, who made cutting comments or crosses themselves when Chenoa passed, but they were increasingly the minority. In 1887, when River was 5 and Cat was 2, Chenoa gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Daniel and David. The multiple birth was a shock, and between 4 children under 6, Dalton and Chenoa found themselves thoroughly overwhelmed. Martha Benson, who had become a good friend over the years, came out to the ranch for 2 weeks after the birth, helping with cooking and cleaning and wrangling the older children while the exhausted parents tried to manage 2 newborns. "I do not know how you 2 do it," Martha said one evening, bouncing a fussing Daniel while Dalton walked with David. "4 little ones, and Chenoa doing it all without sight. You are stronger than anyone I have ever known." "We manage because we must," Chenoa said from where she was nursing David. "And because we have help from friends like you." "Well, you will have help any time you need it," Martha promised. "Half the ladies at church have been asking about you, wanting to know if you need meals brought out or help with the children. You have got more support than you know." It was true. Over the years, as people saw how Dalton and Chenoa lived their lives with integrity and love, prejudices had softened. Their children, beautiful blends of both heritages, charmed nearly everyone they met. River was particularly popular, a thoughtful boy who loved stories and learning, who could speak both English and Shoshone with equal fluency. Cat was a wild thing, climbing trees and chasing chickens, more likely to be found with torn clothes and dirty face than clean and proper, but her fearless joy was infectious. The twins developed distinct personalities early. Daniel was quiet and observant, content to sit and watch the world, while David was constantly moving, needing action and stimulation. Together they formed a unit, rarely happy apart, communicating in the mysterious language of twins that left everyone else baffled. As the children grew, Chenoa made sure they knew their Shoshone heritage. She taught them the language, told them stories of her people, explained the spiritual beliefs that guided her understanding of the world. When Running Wolf visited with his family in the summer of 1889, he spent hours with the children, showing them traditional games, teaching River the beginning of horsemanship in the Shoshone style, telling Cat stories about warrior women who defended their people. "You have done well," Running Wolf told Chenoa on the last evening of his visit. "These children know who they are, where they come from on both sides. They will walk in both worlds with pride." "That was always my hope," Chenoa said. "That they would not have to choose, the way I felt I did when I married Dalton. They can be fully themselves, Shoshone and white together." "The world is changing," Running Wolf said. "Not always for the better, but in this way perhaps it is good. Children like yours are the future, bridges between peoples who have been at war too long." After Running Wolf left, Dalton found Chenoa sitting alone on the porch, her face turned toward the setting sun she could not see but could feel warming her skin, thinking deep thoughts. He asked, settling beside her. "Thinking about how strange life is," she said. "If those men had not attacked my family, if I had not fallen into the creek, if you had not found me that day, none of this would exist. Our children would not be here. This life we built would not be real." "Does that bother you?" Dalton asked carefully. Knowing that such terrible things led to happiness, she was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I still miss my family. I still have nightmares about that day. But then, I hear River reading to his siblings, or Cat laughing as she plays, or the twins chattering to each other, and I think maybe the spirits knew what they were doing. Maybe my family's spirits guided me to you, knowing I would be safe, that I would build something good from the ashes of what was lost." "I believe that," Dalton said, taking her hand. "I believe they are watching over us, your family and mine. Watching all these grandchildren running around, happy and loved." "Tell me what you see now," Chenoa said, as she had asked him countless times over the years. "Tell me about the sunset." So Dalton described the sky, the brilliant oranges and pinks, the way the clouds caught fire with color, the long shadows stretching across their land. He told her about River helping Daniel up onto the fence rail, about Cat doing cartwheels in the yard, about David chasing a grasshopper. He painted the scene with words, knowing his descriptions were her window to the visible world. "It is beautiful," she said when he finished. "All of it, even the parts I cannot see." The years flowed on like the creek that had once saved Chenoa's life, bringing changes both small and large. River grew into a serious young man who loved reading and wanted to become a teacher. Cat became an accomplished horsewoman who could outride any of the ranch hands Dalton employed. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, working together on the ranch with an efficiency that came from their uncanny understanding of each other. In 1895, when Dalton was 40 and Chenoa was 34, they welcomed their last child, a daughter named Clara who was born with a caul over her face, which Chenoa said was a sign of spiritual gifts. Clara did indeed seem to have an unusual perception, knowing things she should not know, seeing things others missed. As she grew, Chenoa taught her about Shoshone spiritual practices, and Clara absorbed the lessons with a hunger that suggested she had been waiting for this knowledge all her life. "She will be a healer," Chenoa said confidently when Clara was 6. "She has the gift of understanding what is wrong and how to fix it, whether in bodies or spirits." Dalton did not doubt it. He had long since learned to trust Chenoa's instincts about such things, just as he trusted her knowledge of the land, the animals, the rhythms of seasons. She might not be able to see, but she perceived truth in ways that did not require sight. The turn of the century brought reflection. On a warm June evening in 1900, Dalton and Chenoa sat on their porch, watching their older children prepare for a community dance in Bozeman. River was 18 now, courting a nice girl from town who did not seem to care that his mother was Shoshone. Kat was 16 and had broken 3 boys' hearts that Dalton knew of, too independent to settle for anyone who could not match her spirit. The twins were 13, already taller than their mother, and showing signs they would match their father's height. Clara was 5, sitting contentedly at Chenoa's feet, playing with a doll her grandmother Martha had made for her. 18 years, Dalton said, counting back to that April morning when he had found Chenoa by the creek. 18 years since my life changed completely. Mine too, Chenoa said, reaching for his hand. I was so close to death that day. Sometimes I still dream I am drowning, that the water is pulling me under. Then I wake up here in our bed with you beside me, and I remember I was saved. In every way a person can be saved. I was the one who was saved, Dalton countered. I was so alone before you, I did not even realize how alone until suddenly I was not anymore. Then we saved each other, Chenoa said. That is what love does. It pulls us from the dark water and gives us solid ground to stand on. River called out that they were leaving, and there was a flurry of goodbyes as the older children headed to town in the wagon. The twins went to the barn to finish evening chores, and Clara announced she was tired and let Dalton carry her inside to bed. When he returned to the porch, Chenoa was singing softly in Shoshone, an old song about the stars and the stories they held. "What does it say?" Dalton asked. He understood more of her language now, but the old song still sometimes eluded him. "It is about how we are all connected," Chenoa translated. "How the stars are the spirits of those who came before, watching over us, guiding us even when we cannot see them. It says that love is the thread that connects past and future, the living and the dead, earth and sky." "I like that," Dalton said. "The idea that all this, everything we have built, is part of something bigger." "It is," Chenoa said with certainty. "When I touched your face that first day I woke in your house, I knew you immediately. Not because I had seen you, but because my spirit recognized yours. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life, meant to bring these children into the world. The spirits arranged it all." Dalton was not sure he believed in destiny quite as completely as Chenoa did, but he could not deny that their meeting, their love, felt like something more than mere chance. Too many impossible things had aligned perfectly for it to be random. So he let himself believe that maybe she was right, that maybe the spirits of her people and the God of his had worked together to bring them through tragedy to joy. As night fell over their ranch, covering the Montana landscape in velvet darkness, Dalton and Chenoa sat together in comfortable silence. Inside the house, Clara slept peacefully. In the barn, the twins worked with easy efficiency. On the road to town, River and Kat laughed with their friends, secure in their place in the world. And here on the porch, two people who should never have met, should never have fallen in love, should never have built this impossible life together, held hands and counted their blessings under stars that watched over them all. The years continued their steady march. River became a teacher in Bozeman, marrying his sweetheart Emma in a ceremony that brought together white townspeople and visiting Shoshone relatives in a celebration that would have been unthinkable 20 years earlier. Kat married late, at 23, to a rancher from the next county who matched her fierce independence with his own quiet strength. They built their ranch into one of the most successful in the region, and Kat never lost her wild spirit, still riding like the wind well into middle age. The twins took over more of Dalton's ranch as he aged, working the land with the same dedication he had always shown. Daniel married a widow with 2 children, becoming an instant father and stepping into the role with gentle grace. David remained unmarried longer, focused on the ranch, but eventually fell in love with a Blackfeet woman he met at a trading post, bringing yet another tribal connection into the family's complex heritage. Clara became exactly what Chenoa predicted, a healer known throughout the region for her skill with both settler medicine and traditional Shoshone remedies. She never married, claiming her work was her calling, but she was beloved by all who knew her, and her house was always full of people seeking help or simply her wise counsel. Dalton and Chenoa aged together with the kind of grace that comes from deep contentment. His hair went white, his back bent from years of hard work, but his eyes still lit up when Chenoa entered a room. She moved more slowly, her joints stiffening with arthritis, but her face remained serene, her spirit undiminished by time. They were grandparents many times over, great-grandparents by the time Dalton turned 60, and their house remained the center of a sprawling, loving family that bridged cultures with increasing ease. In 1910, when Dalton was 55 and Chenoa was 49, they took a trip back to the creek where he had found her that long-ago April morning. The land around it had changed some, a few more homesteads dotting the landscape, but the creek itself still ran clear and cold, still sang its eternal song over the rocks. "This is where it all started," Dalton said, standing at the water's edge. "Right here where the current bends." Chenoa knelt carefully, her movements slower now, and put her hand in the water. "The creek saved me," she said. "It carried me to you. I have always felt it was alive somehow, that it chose to help me." "Maybe it did," Dalton said. "Maybe everything in creation was conspiring to bring us together." She stood, and he helped her up, and they stood together looking at, or in Chenoa's case sensing, the place that had changed both their lives. So many years had passed, so much joy and struggle and love had filled those years, and yet this spot remained as it had been, constant and unchanging while they had built a world around the gift it gave them. "I would do it all again," Chenoa said quietly. "Even knowing the pain I would face, the loss, the difficulties, I would do it all exactly the same to end up here with you." "So would I," Dalton said. "Every single moment, good and bad, led us to this life, and this life has been more than I ever dreamed possible." They stood there a while longer, 2 people grown old together, remembering youth and trauma and healing and love. Then they walked back to their wagon, back to the ranch where their children and grandchildren waited, back to the life they had built from impossible beginnings. The story could end there, with that perfect moment of reflection and gratitude. But life, as Chenoa often said, was not a story that ended when it reached a satisfying moment. Life continued, rolling forward like that creek, sometimes smooth and sometimes rough, but always moving toward the great ocean of whatever came after. Dalton lived to be 72, dying peacefully in his sleep on a winter night in 1927, with Chenoa holding his hand. She felt him go, felt the moment his spirit left, and though she grieved, she was not destroyed by it. They had been given 45 years together, more than many couples could claim, and those years had been full of more love than some people experienced in twice that time. Chenoa lived another 8 years without Dalton, cared for by her children, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had inherited the best of both the cultures that flowed in their veins. She told stories of her people, taught the old ways to any who wanted to learn, but mostly she spoke of Dalton, of the white rancher who had saved a blind Shoshone woman and, in doing so, saved himself. On a spring morning in 1935, 53 years after Dalton had pulled her from the creek, Chenoa died quietly, sitting in her chair on the porch of the ranch house, her face turned toward the sun. Clara was with her and later said that just before she passed, Chenoa smiled and reached out her hand as if greeting someone. She said a name, Clara told the family gathered for the funeral. She said Dalton, and she smiled like she used to smile when he came in from working. Like she was seeing him again after a long time apart. They buried her next to Dalton on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view, had she been able to see it, of the distant mountains and the creek that wound through the property. At the funeral, people came from 3 counties, White and Shoshone and Blackfeet, people whose lives had been touched by the couple who had defied convention and expectation to build something beautiful and lasting. River, now 53 and gray-haired himself, spoke at the service about his parents' legacy. They taught us that love was stronger than hate, that understanding could bridge any divide, that what people said was impossible was only impossible if you believed them. They taught us to honor both sides of who we are, to be proud of our heritage on both sides. They taught us that family is not just blood but also choice, and they chose every day to build a life that would outlast them. We are the proof of their choice. All of us, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, we are what happens when love is stronger than fear. The family plot on that hillside grew over the years as more of that generation passed, as the children and eventually grandchildren joined their parents and grandparents in the earth. But the ranch continued, passed down through the family, worked by descendants who inherited Dalton's strong build and Chenoa's spiritual wisdom, who spoke English and Shoshone, who bridged worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. The story of how Dalton and Chenoa met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished slightly with each generation but keeping the essential truth at its core. A lonely rancher found a dying woman in a creek and saved her. She touched his face and recognized him from her dreams, declaring him the one the spirits had promised. They fell in love despite all the obstacles society placed in their path, built a family that defied easy categorization, and lived long enough to see their love transform not just their own lives but the entire community around them. In time, even the skeptics acknowledged that something special had happened on that ranch outside Bozeman, Montana. Something that demonstrated love's ability to transcend difference, to heal wounds both physical and spiritual, to build bridges where others saw only chasms. The Xavier Ranch became known as a place where anyone was welcome regardless of their background, where old tribal enemies and former adversaries could sit at the same table, where children of all kinds could play together without anyone telling them they should not. It was a legacy built by 2 people who should never have met, sustained by children who refused to choose between their heritages, and carried forward by generations who understood that their very existence was an answer to those who said such unions were impossible, wrong, doomed to fail. They were the living proof that love, real love built on respect and understanding and daily choice, could not just survive but thrive even in the hardest soil. The creek still runs through that property, still sings its song over the rocks where Dalton found Chenoa more than a century ago. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure still stands at its center, bones of timber and stone as solid as the day Dalton built them with his own hands. And on spring mornings, when mist rises from the water and the light comes golden over the mountains, you might imagine you can see them there, a tall white man and a blind Shoshone woman, standing together at the water's edge, holding hands and watching, or in her case feeling, the sun rise on another day of the impossible life they built together. That is the story of Dalton Xavier and Chenoa Joyah, of a love that began with tragedy and bloomed into something that changed not just two lives, but created ripples that spread outward for generations. It is a story about healing and hope, about the courage to love across divides, about two people who looked at what the world told them was impossible and decided to make it real anyway. And if you believe in spirits, as Chenoa did, then perhaps somewhere beyond the veil that separates this world from whatever comes next, they are still together, still learning each other, still building their love one day at a time. Because some loves are too strong to end with death, too powerful to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves, the ones that begin with impossible recognition and grow through daily choice and commitment, those loves echo through eternity, changing the fabric of the world in ways both seen and unseen, creating futures that would not exist without them. That is the gift Dalton and Chenoa gave to the world. Not just their children or their ranch or their example, but proof that love, real transformative love, can take the broken pieces of tragedy and build from them something beautiful, something lasting, something that continues long after the original builders have gone to their rest. They showed that what seemed impossible was only waiting for someone brave enough to try, someone willing to reach across the divide and take the hand offered from the other side. And in the end, that is what Chenoa meant when she touched Dalton's face that first time and said those impossible words. She was not just recognizing him from her dreams. She was declaring that the impossible was about to become real, that two people from worlds that should never meet were going to build something that would outlast them both, something that would prove love was stronger than any obstacle humans could create. She was right. The spirits knew what they were doing when they guided her to that creek, when they sent Dalton riding along his fence line that exact morning, when they brought together a lonely rancher and a blind tribal woman who should never have crossed paths. From that impossible meeting came a love story for the ages, a family that bridged cultures, a legacy that demonstrated what becomes possible when people choose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, hope over despair. That is how the impossible becomes real. One choice at a time, one day at a time, one love at a time. Dalton and Chenoa proved it was possible, and their descendants carry that proof forward into the future, living embodiments of the truth that love, given room to grow, can transform not just individuals but entire communities, can heal old wounds and prevent new ones, can build futures that honor the past while reaching toward something better. Their story did not end when they died. It continued in every child who learned both English and Shoshone, in every family gathering that brought together people who once saw each other as enemies, in every moment of understanding that replaced ignorance, in every act of love that crossed boundaries society said should not be crossed. Their story continues still, will continue as long as people remember that the word impossible is only true if we let it be, that love is stronger than hate, that a single act of kindness, a single choice to help instead of harm, can change the course of countless lives in ways we cannot predict but must trust. That is the real legacy of the lonely rancher and the blind tribal woman, the impossible love that became the most real thing either of them ever knew, the story that reminds us all that miracles happen not in spite of, but because of human choice, human courage, human love. Their story whispers across the years with a message that never grows old. Love is possible. Healing is possible. Hope is possible. You just have to be brave enough to try, wise enough to trust, and strong enough to keep choosing love even when the world tells you to choose something else. And so the creek continues to run. The ranch continues to stand. The descendants continue to grow and thrive. And somewhere beyond sight but not beyond sensing, Dalton and Chenoa continue their love story in whatever form comes after this life. Because some things, the best things, the truest things, do not end. They just transform, taking new shapes while keeping their essential nature unchanged. That is the power of love. That is the gift of choice. That is the promise that when we open our hearts to what seems impossible, we might just find that impossible was only another word for the miracle that was waiting to happen all along. Dalton and Chenoa found their miracle by a creek in Montana Territory in 1882, and they spent the rest of their lives nurturing it, protecting it, watching it grow into something that outlasted them both and will continue to inspire long after everyone who knew them personally has gone. Their love story is complete now, brought to its natural close by time and death and the inevitable march of years. But the effects of that love ripple onward, touching lives they never knew, creating possibilities they never imagined, proving again and again that what began as impossible became the most real, the most true, the most lasting thing either of them ever knew. And that, in the end, is all any love story can hope to achieve. To leave the world better than it found it, to create more love than existed before, to prove that hope is not foolish but wise, that faith is not blind but seeing what matters most, that love is not weak but the strongest force in all creation. That is the complete story of Dalton Xavier and Chenoa Joyah, two souls who found each other against all odds and built from their meeting a legacy of love that will echo through generations. Their story has a proper ending, with both of them lived full lives, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that their love had transformed their corner of the world. They rest now in the earth they loved, on the ranch they built, overlooking the land they tended and the creek that brought them together. And if love truly is eternal, if the spirits Chenoa believed in are real, if there is any justice in the universe, then they are together still, finally both able to see with new eyes the beauty they created together, the impossible that they made real through nothing more and nothing less than love.